Hey friends, you ever notice how the global news cycle used to feel like a river? Slow, predictable, a current you could follow without getting swept away? A handful of major stories, a few political skirmishes, the occasional disaster. You'd wake up, scan the headlines, maybe feel a flicker of concern or sympathy or mild annoyance, and then you'd move on with your day, unchanged. But now it feels like standing directly in front of a fire hose. Not information in any calm, digestible sense. Emotion. Raw, unrelenting emotion. Anger, outrage, fear, adrenaline. And that bone deep exhaustion that comes from never quite catching your breath. And the strangest part? It doesn't matter where you live anymore. Whether you're in Berlin, Seoul, Sao Paulo, London, Delhi, Johannesburg, or some quiet town where the nearest international airport is a 5-hour drive, you open your feed and the emotional center of gravity is still the same person, Donald Trump. Because watching global news in the Trump era isn't really about politics anymore. It's like watching a live electrical grid where someone keeps flipping breakers on and off at random. Entire regions of the world flicker in and out. Markets flicker, alliances flicker, and the emotional experience of following it is intense in a way politics almost never used to be. Because the thing that defines this era isn't just controversy, it's velocity, the dizzying speed at which one emotional trigger instantly replaces another. And once you notice that pattern, you realize something quietly unsettling. You can no longer watch global news as a detached spectator. You are being pulled into the emotional system itself. Let's start with something simple: war. 5 weeks ago, the world woke up to headlines about a rapidly escalating confrontation involving the United States, Israel, and Iran. Markets dropped hard. Oil prices spiked overnight. Asian stock markets plunged as investors braced for the possibility of a wider regional conflict. And the language surrounding it was pure theater. A massive and decisive attack, promises that the conflict would be short and contained, then warnings it might spiral, then fresh threats, then tentative negotiations, then more threats. The emotional whiplash wasn't confined to Washington. It rippled outward instantly. If you were watching from Tokyo, you were tracking the price of oil and its threat to energy imports. If you were in Germany, your mind went straight to NATO commitments and energy security. If you were in India, you were calculating the impact on shipping lanes and the Strait of Hormuz. And suddenly, the news wasn't abstract geopolitics. It was immediate anxiety. Because modern global conflict doesn't stay distant. It travels through supply chains, energy markets, food prices, inflation, and people feel those things in their daily lives the moment the first headline drops. The moment a geopolitical crisis begins, it doesn't linger in the foreign policy section. It leaps straight into the cost of living. But that's only one layer. What makes the experience of watching Trump-era news different is not just the stakes, it's the relentless multiplication of crises. Take trade policy. When Trump returned to office, one of the first major economic moves was the reimposition of sweeping tariffs on key trading partners. Not gradual tweaks, waves, large enough that economists began comparing them to levels not seen since the Great Depression. Financial markets reacted with panic. Governments retaliated. Companies scrambled to reroute supply chains. And suddenly, trade policy, something that used to live in dense economic journals, became front-page emotional news. People arguing about tariffs on TikTok, factory workers debating geopolitics on Facebook, investors refreshing stock apps every 30 seconds. Because tariffs aren't just policy, they're a signal. They tell the entire world that the largest economy on Earth is willing to rewrite the rules of global trade overnight. And that signal creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates fear. Fear creates anger. Anger creates nationalism. And if you think the emotional intensity stops at economics, it doesn't. Consider climate policy. When Trump addressed global audiences at the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, he dismissed climate change as a hoax and tore into international environmental agreements. The effect wasn't polite disagreement, it was emotional detonation. Environmental activists erupted in fury. Conservative supporters erupted in celebration. Allies watched decades of painstaking climate diplomacy begin to unravel. And suddenly, climate policy, once the slowest, most technocratic corner of international relations, became a battlefield of identity, morality, and raw outrage. Again, not calm debate, emotion. Intense, immediate, and wildly contagious emotion. And this emotional acceleration shows up in places you wouldn't expect. Global markets, for instance. A recent academic analysis examined the first 100 days of Trump's second term and found that major financial markets worldwide displayed unusual volatility patterns precisely during periods of intense policy announcements. The researchers used entropy analysis, a mathematical measure of chaos in financial signals. The conclusion was striking. Markets weren't simply reacting to hard economic data anymore. They were reacting to narrative shocks, policy statements, tariff announcements, sudden geopolitical escalations. In other words, political communication itself had become a market-moving force. A single tweet, a speech, a threat, a promise, each one capable of triggering billions of dollars in movement across the global economy, which means millions of ordinary people were now emotionally invested in every single headline, because their retirement accounts, their jobs, their grocery bills, all of it hung in the balance. But the emotional intensity isn't only about policy. Sometimes it's pure spectacle. Take one of the longest presidential speeches in modern U.S. history, a 108-minute address to Congress, 2 full hours of uninterrupted rhetoric. The response wasn't measured analysis. It was an instant storm. Clips went viral within minutes. Supporters celebrated it as historic. Critics dissected every line for hidden meanings. Because modern politics has stopped being just governance. It has become performance. Every speech is a media event. Every media event is a battlefield. Every battlefield generates fresh waves of emotion. And then there are the institutional shocks, the sudden firings, the internal shakeups, the moments when the machinery of government itself seems to tremble. Just recently, the administration removed the U.S. Attorney General amid controversy over high-profile investigations. At the same time, the White House floated broader cabinet changes as pressure mounted over the war with Iran and sliding approval ratings. Once again, the emotional response was instantaneous. Supporters demanded absolute loyalty. Critics warned of dangerous instability. Analysts speculated about chaos at the highest levels. And every one of those reactions multiplied the sense that the news cycle itself had become unstable, that politics was no longer a slow-moving institution. It was live, unscripted drama. Now here's where the experience of watching global news becomes truly exhausting, because these events don't unfold one at a time. They stack on top of one another. Trade wars, military escalations, climate disputes, cabinet shakeups, economic volatility, all of them arriving inside the same 24-hour window, which means the emotional state of the audience never gets a chance to reset. One crisis bleeds straight into the next. You never reach the calm after the storm. The storm simply refreshes itself. And this produces something psychologists recognize all too well: permanent alertness, the nagging feeling that something urgent is always happening somewhere, and that if you dare look away, you might miss the exact moment when everything changes forever. That's the emotional architecture of modern political news. Not reflection, not patience, just constant alertness, adrenaline, outrage. And the strangest twist of all, even people who despise Trump often end up feeding the very system they hate, because outrage is still attention. Attention is still amplification, and amplification is what keeps the entire cycle spinning. Every shocking statement becomes a viral clip. Every viral clip becomes a heated debate. Every debate becomes tomorrow's headline. And suddenly, the news ecosystem is running almost entirely on emotional energy. This is why watching global news now feels fundamentally different from even 10 years ago. The emotional amplitude is higher, the pace is faster, the stakes feel larger, and the gravitational center of the entire narrative is a single political figure who seems to understand, perhaps better than anyone, that attention itself is power. And the result? You can't just watch the news anymore. You experience it. You feel it in your chest. You react to it in the moment. You argue about it with strangers and friends alike. Because the modern political environment doesn't simply inform people, it activates them. It pulls them in. It keeps them locked in the current. And the longer you stay inside that current, the harder it becomes to remember what still water ever felt like. But here's what almost no one talks about. This isn't just happening on the surface. It's reshaping how we think, how we feel, and even how we sleep. People report checking their phones first thing in the morning and last thing at night, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of a low-grade dread that something critical might have shifted while they were offline. The nervous system stays primed, the cortisol levels stay elevated, and over weeks and months, that constant low-level activation starts to feel normal. We begin to mistake alertness for awareness. We begin to mistake emotional intensity for depth. And the quieter voices, the ones that used to offer perspective, context, or even simple human kindness, get drowned out in the roar. It shows up in families, too. Dinner tables that once discussed local schools or weekend plans now crackle with arguments about distant tariffs or overnight tweets. Old friendships strain under the weight of clashing interpretations of the same 10-second clip. Even people who swear they've checked out of politics find themselves pulled back in by the sheer gravitational force of the spectacle. Because the system doesn't reward disengagement. It punishes it. Step away for a week, and you return to a conversation that has already moved 3 crises ahead, leaving you feeling like you've missed the plot entirely. And yet, buried underneath all of this noise is a quieter realization. The emotional fire hose isn't an accident. It's the feature. It's how power operates in the attention economy. The faster the cycle, the less time anyone has to think critically. The louder the outrage, the less room for nuance. The more personal the drama feels, the more we forget that most of these events are happening far beyond our actual control. We are left reacting instead of reflecting, feeling instead of understanding. And in that gap between reaction and reflection, something essential gets lost: the ability to see the bigger picture, the ability to breathe, the ability to remember that the world is still turning, even when the headlines stop screaming. So maybe the real question isn't whether we can keep up with the pace. Maybe the real question is whether we want to. Because the fire hose will keep blasting, the breakers will keep flipping, the emotional current will keep pulling. But somewhere, in the quiet moments we choose to protect, there is still space to step back, to ask ourselves what we're actually feeling and why. And whether this version of staying informed is making us better people or simply more exhausted ones. The river is gone, the fire hose remains. The choice, however small, is still ours.
coming up on the theater settlement. The woman who runs it is named Odessa Sawyer. Try to stay on her good side.
One's not getting away! Get down!
Serious trauma detected. Agent killed.